the world's writers will walk through those gates. And if you hang around, you get a chance to talk to them.
I'm interested in conversations that deal with things that matter, but real, how do we live our lives?
First of all, make climate change personal in your life. The second step is get angry and get active. And the third step, and believe it or not, I think this is the most important. We have to imagine this world that we want to hurry towards.
It's about kindness is looking at people as people and not as I voted this, I do this, whatever it is. There are some people we will never get along with, but most of us are a complex mass of different things.
Hello, I'm Ian Rankin. I've been with the Edinburgh International Book Festival basically since day one. I went as a student, as a reader, as a fan of writing. Later on, I was invited to go as an author, which was a thrill. And it's a spectacular experience. It's a meeting of minds. It's a way to open your mind to new experiences, to new ideas, nuanced debate, entertainment, something for every age group. And that's what keeps me going back year after year after year. Long may it continue.
Abiy's Day by Linda Yohannes. Abiy decided, sitting as a third person on a two-seater row in a minibus taxi on his way to work, that today's lesson would be the interdentals. He listed topics to be covered under that, and after a mental preparation of under 5 minutes, he was ready for class. Freed from such trifling responsibilities, his mind could now go back to focusing on how he was going to live out this ball of greatness he felt inside of him. He got off the minibus at one of the newest buildings in central Addis Ababa and went inside. He found the elevator empty and jumped in to go to the 9th floor. Inspecting his looks in the full-length mirror, he saw he looked refined. He never felt uncomfortable standing upright in his short stature. He knew brains were more important than looks. Abiy was a little ahead of himself and bounced a little as he walked around with the air of someone who has brilliantly discovered a shortcut to where everyone else, ungifted, was taking the long walk. Born in a regular Addis Ababan family, a son among other self-absorbed siblings, he grew up watching English cartoons on satellite TV, and by the time he was showering by himself, he was already rapping along with Tupac. Later discovering this skill in English was one that one could get paid for. He became a teacher in one of the several English language schools dotted throughout Addis Ababa. In class, he addressed his students with great confidence. Gesturing with his hands, he carried no books or papers to class, and such dependencies were not for an expert like him. Protruding his tongue between his teeth and sounding th. He demonstrated the interdentals. Look carefully how I put my tongue between my teeth and let air out through the inhibited opening. Theater, thin, thank. This is how you say through, he instructed. Not through, okay? The classroom was full of youngsters who, growing up speaking Amharic, never expected to someday have to ask this of their tongue. This was among the skills that had gained Abiy respect in the past. His American English had classmates staring at him long after he was done answering a question. He could say water with a trilling R and not water. He said bottle and not bottle. They stared with hanging jaws, wanting to hear more of this white man speaking through the mouth of their classmate. When in the eyes of his 15-year-old classmates he became omnipotent as far as English was concerned, Abiy extended this to apply to everything he was destined to be. Okay, again, let me hear everyone say through, he said, snapping his fingers above his pupils' head who were all staring up at him, tongue in teeth. Abiy was happy in the 2 years he taught in this school, but he wanted more happy. He wanted his great success to begin and wanted to get closer to that thing inside of him, that thing he saw glowing from under his skin when he looked in the mirror. He told his friends, sitting in a dingy bar, cigarette in hand, that he was going to be rich. He was one who thought that being modest and hiding one's desires and plans to get rich was passé. When he was in university, he read and became deeply persuaded by How to Get Rich books that made becoming a millionaire seem as easy as making a paper boat. Abiy gnawed at his below half thumbnail as he deliberated on how to access a high-paying job. He knew that once introduced into this world of English-speaking elite, he would impress one employee after another before, in one big, detailed and specific for the moment, leap, he would be at the top and everyone would be working for him.
All right, welcome to the Edinburgh International Book Festival podcast event Outriders Africa with myself, Kei Miller, and Kayus Bankole. The Outriders project sent 5 pairs of writers, so 10 writers in all, on journeys around the African continent. And I guess each of them had their own questions and urgencies and inquiries about history and colonialism and perceptions of Africa, and what the continent means to the world and to themselves, with the hope that in the end these questions might be explored artistically. So I'm Kei Miller. I am a poet and a novelist and an essayist, I guess. And my journey started in Kenya, then I went to Ethiopia, then we ended up in Ghana. And Kayus is here with me. Kayus, do you want to tell the audience a little bit about yourself and what your journey was?
So, hello, everybody. I'm Kayus Bankole. And so I caught up with Kai in Ethiopia and proceeded the journey onwards to Ghana. Stayed with Kai in Ghana, and he left earlier than I did, so I had longer time there. So unfortunately, I never had the chance to travel with him to Kenya. But for those who don't know who I am, I'm an I guess by trade, I'm a musician, but just a person who has nothing but love for the spoken word. Um, and yeah, so I think we'll start off by talking with Kai and where he began his journey.
Yeah, well, I began the journey in Kenya, as I said, uh, which was all kinds of weird and wonderful. Uh, the I ended up writing a lot about the journeys the whole way, but I think one of the big reasons why I wanted to go to Kenya was because of a writer, an African writer who is very important to me, and a friend, Binyavanga Wenena, who died about a year ago. And Kenya was his home, and we'd always promised to meet up either in Kenya or Jamaica. So it was really good to be in Kenya and see that literary scene, uh, but hard as well. I guess one thing that weirdly stands out for me was landing in Kenya, and the immigration officer said, "What I now know is caribou." But I had heard Caribbean or Carib, so I thought he was acknowledging where I was from, and so I stupidly said, yes, that's exactly where I'm from. And he looked at me very oddly because I didn't know that this was the Swahili word for welcome. Uh, but when I realized that that's what was being said to me over and over, it 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 felt kind of wonderful that this word that meant welcome was a word that I felt identified me and who I am in the world. Uh, but yeah, Kenya. I mean, specifically, I was in Nairobi. Uh, and one of the incidents that I write about in my blog, I think I was telling you about, was just walking in the city late at night and being almost being mugged just by three homeless guys who cornered me.
I remember that story.
Yeah, and just how terrifying that was. And I never. I guess it was interesting being, as a Caribbean person and a Caribbean person of African descent, going to the African continent, one feels all these kinds of weird things. But part of it is feeling this sense of invincibility of going to a place that is a kind of spiritual home, an ancestral home in ways. And I think one of the weird things to contend with is the ways in which you stick out, the ways in which you are marked as foreign immediately, as not necessarily belonging. But just getting to grips with just the ways in which every city has its dangers, and if you don't know, if you're not from that place, you can walk very stupidly into those dangers. Do you know what I mean?
Did you feel like you stood out because of your physicality, or more to do with the way like you carried yourself or your accent? Or did you have this like special gloss in you that made you seem a little bit more Western than everyone else?
Yeah, I've been trying to think about that for since I've been back. What makes us stand out in places? Uh, because because I've been thinking about belonging for a long time, and the need to belong, the desire in us to belong. And I think what we mean by that is we want a place where no one recognizes us, where we do not stick out in any way, where we don't arouse questions. And if I'm honest, even in Jamaica now, I stick out. I wear the wrong clothes. I wear the wrong kinds of jewelry. I mean, not wrong, but not conventional. And I think if I'm honest, there are ways in which I don't want to fit in very obvious ways. Um, and then again, I was thinking about Binyavanga as well. And when Binya went back to Kenya, I know now he was ill, and he knew he was ill, and he knew he was possibly dying. But Binya went back as almost outrageously queer and outrageously kind of standing out. He was a big, black, African looking man who would wear pink tutus, and he dyed his hair pink and purple, and that was interesting to me afterwards, just to think about, when do we stick out? When do we not stick out? Do we always want to blend in or not? So I don't have an easy answer to those questions, but I know it was awkward, those moments. But I guess also it is the dangers of sticking out, I guess, is when you think that sticking out makes you vulnerable and it makes you the target of a possible attack in any way. But I mean, I know we're kind of skipping all about the place, and we might not do this chronologically, but I wondered about that for you as well. My connection with the continent is, I mean, literally indirect. But your connection is a lot more direct, and I wondered how you engaged with that feeling of. Did you feel that you stood out? Did you feel the need to blend in any way? How did you deal with those kinds of tensions, being African but being not African, quote unquote?
Yeah, I do agree. Like, there's something that I don't know. It just, you can tell a mile away that, like, even though we all share the same skin tone, and being a person born in, well, parents of two Nigerians, you would think like it's in my blood, so they'll know that like I'm not too far away. I'm your neighbor. But I think it's mainly to do with my accent as well. And what would I say? Yeah, it was. I thought I can carry myself as a Nigerian when I was in Ghana, and it will still fly by, and I'll be accepted for being someone not too far away. That, oh, he's one of us. But it didn't really happen. I I wanted to blend in so badly. So like as you said, there won't be an arousal for questions, and um, there's just like weird feeling in the back of your head where you feel like there's no way I can be cheated. There's no way I like anyone would cheat me because they'll know that like I'm used to the way in which things move around here. But like I was delusional. It wasn't the case, and I had many encounters with people, and um, it kind of put me in my place a little bit.
I mean, I think I felt that with you. Not you being put in your place, but it was very obvious as we were in Ghana together, the ways you would talk to me, and then the ways you talk to uh, people who are Ghanaian, and it was just such a dramatic accent switch. And I almost felt jealous because I couldn't adopt a kind of convincing West African accent in the way you could. But you were always deploying that accent. But I also recognize it in myself. Like sometimes I go back to Jamaica and I ramp up my Jamaican accent, and people will ask me. I remember once going to a waterfalls in Jamaica, a very popular waterfalls, Dunn's River, and one of the guides at the waterfall said to me, "Where are you from?" And I said, "Yeah, I come from Jamaica." And he said, "Yes, but where do you live now?" And and I just said, "Yes, I live in Jamaica." He said, "No, no, no." I said, "No, but now I talk about where you're born." He said, "Where do you live?" And he kept on insisting, and it was as if I couldn't. Something about myself revealed that I no longer lived in Jamaica, and he refused to accept my Jamaicanness. It's an interesting tension.
Yeah, there was a couple of years back when I was in Nigeria, and I found it extremely fascinating the way which the volume of how people spoke to each other. There was a natural flow that you had to be there and live there for a long period of time for you to have. So there was friends of mine who have traveled back to Nigeria and now live there. And I don't know if I'm putting a 5 year time scale, but the 5 years, so from when they first came, those questions were coming up like, oh, like, where are you from? Or like, where do you live, and like, how long are you going to be in Nigeria for? And as time goes on within that 5-year period, there's like a switch that just clicks on, and it's not questioned anymore. So I don't know what that is. I can sense the difference myself as I talked about the tonality in which people speak to. There's just like heightened volume, heightened excitement, heightened exuberance. And when I was there, I was like, oh, this is great. I think I've picked up just a little bit of it. I want to take this back with me when I get back to Scotland, and like have the same kind of like tenacity or whatever. But it didn't last there. It didn't work.
Yeah, it's interesting how we absorb and become part of the places in which we live. I by the same token, I am weirdly freaked out in the UK when I am in a conversation with someone, and probably after 20 minutes or 30 minutes of talking, I say something and they say to me, "Oh my God, you're not British, are you?" And I go, "How could you ever confuse me as being British? Why would it take you 20 minutes or 30 minutes to figure that out? That should be obvious from the very first thing I say." And then I realize that it's clear that you just absorb things and you begin to speak in different ways, and without realizing how much you're adapting. Sorry. Yeah. Yeah. So Kenya, as I said, Kenya was wild and it was wonderful and it was, it was a good introduction to that space, and I think it was especially useful for me again because I was kind of walking in Binya's footsteps, and just thinking about his very famous essay, How to Write About Africa, in which he's really telling us how not to write about Africa, how to look at Africa without the cliches and all those kind of stupid stereotypes that we always throw at it. You know, I think part of the project was, as I said, about us going back to this continent that, you know, is so wildly imagined in sometimes very problematic ways. What did the journey mean for you to go back again to a place that is a lot more intimate for you? But what were you looking for on this journey?
I was looking for inspiration, and just before the journey kicked off, was in the process of writing new material for with 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 my band, and so I wanted to, find some form of rhythm that I just wasn't getting at home. Just a bit of background. There's like 2 years between the times where I was like in the studio recording. So with that gap, I don't know, I just kind of felt slightly lost, really. And so when the opportunity came to travel to the continent, I was like, yeah, like, let me return to the rhythm, really. And so that's what I was searching for. What I found was a completely different. And yeah, it was completely different. And what I should have done in hindsight was not to want anything, expect anything. Um, but I did. And I think if I never held on to any form of expectation, I think it would have opened up the doors for a lot more possibility when I was out there.
Yeah. Oh, that's fascinating because I think so. That question is like, what did you go there to do or to find? Was very difficult for me. Like I purposely threw that question to you first because I don't know how to answer it. I think I am that person that you're describing. I don't know that I was expecting anything. Um, you know, yeah. So walking, everything was a surprise. But I don't know if that makes uh, some of the surprises any less surprising, or the inspirations any less inspirational, or the disappointments any more disappointing or less disappointing. Because like, even that moment of being almost mugged, it was weirdly disappointing. But until I felt the disappointment, I didn't know that I was expecting something else. It was the disappointment that made me aware of an expectation that I didn't realize I had before. If that makes any sense.
Yeah.
But what we're so I guess my disappointments, and it's weird. I mean, I don't want to say that I was that it was a crippling disappointment in any way. It was just realizing that I expected to fit in a way that would never have happened. And then the whole trip was thinking about that process of being from this place that I think Caribbean people, and just African diasporic people, there is a disappointment that we never really confess to, or we find it strange to confess to, and it's a disappointment that's rooted in hurt. And that came home for me when we went to Ghana and we were at El Minas Castle. But it's who is the bad guy in this story that made it possible for 10 million Africans to be transported to this quote unquote new world. And sometimes the bad guy in that story feels like it's us. So while I'm in Ghana and I'm on this tour, it feels like you are the one who sold me out. Why did you do that? Why did you choose to sell some of your fellow Africans?
Mhm.
And
You're gonna need to elaborate on that for me.
so, meaning in the process of slavery had lots of people who made it possible. And it's easy to, like, we understand the need for labor. We understand how racism began. We understand the kind of white, just the racial injustices that happened. But part of that process was only possible because of some tribes selling out, quote unquote, their own people for whatever it was, whether it was political power or it was whatever they could trade or whatever money they could get at that time. And so you go back to this place and you see people who have lived here, for the last 500 years, and you think the only reason I don't live here, the only reason I wasn't born here, is because you were complicit, or your ancestors were complicit in selling me out. And why did you do that? And it's a weirdly impossible question to ask or to answer, because you're going way back in time. But I think it's a weird hurt that's rooted in several of us who are born on that other side of the world, and going back to that space brings it back home. But we don't know how exactly to ask it, because you have to ask it very carefully. And again, like all hurts, it feels emotional, and it's not always intelligent. And once you bring intelligence to it, you can complicate it in all kinds of ways, but it doesn't change the fact that there is a hurt there. I think I ended up rambling, but what I wanted to ask before, and we haven't even talked about what our journeys were comprised of, but I know that was my disappointment, or those are parts of my weird disappointments, which became interesting and productive disappointments. But I wondered if you could elaborate more on what some of your disappointments were.
Ah. Um. So some of my disappointments would have been what I said earlier about, was like, I was excited, and like excitement sometimes breeds expectations, and I was excited that I would, you know, travel to Ethiopia and see art and be able to translate that into something through my perspective. Um, but because I was so focused on my mind as what I like translate as art, what I've used to seeing as art, I was forgetting to look at the real art within people's interaction, the real art into like um, what the exchange and just what is around me and scenically as well. I was too concentrated on I want to see a painting. I want to like read stuff or I want to hear music and like there was rhythms all around. There was rhythms in the pitter patter of people's feet. There was rhythm in like the accent. There was rhythm in the actual language that was there. Um, so I realized it in hindsight, and now I'm like trying to revisit those moments and appreciate it. I guess my only disappointment is while I was there, um, those mundane and minute walks and simple walks and all that stuff, I didn't really soak it in as I should have. If that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it does. But I mean, at the same time, I think he gave me access to some of those very simple, everyday, magical moments when we met up in Ethiopia. Um, and this is embarrassing. I've already forgotten their names. But you struck up a friendship with these two guys in Ethiopia in Lalebello, and I thought the way just to meet these two strangers who were so interested in our well-being and
Yeah.
in allowing us to experience their community and their life, it was so deeply moving, and it felt to me that you were the one who you're just being vulnerable with them or accessing that kind of community, and I found it really inspiring the way you could do that, and it allowed me to have that experience with them, just going up the mountain and seeing the sunset, which was one of the most amazing sunsets I'd ever seen. So I wanted to thank you for that.
I don't think I think it was I thought it was you actually, because from what I remember, we went to a place to a bar to get like honey wine. Can't
Yeah,
remember the name of
exactly.
the spot that we went to.
Yeah, but it was the honey wine. There was a lot of alcohol involved.
And I think they struck a conversation with you first, um, and from there, I, whenever going to anywhere new, it's always great to speak or engage with the people from there. Like you just get to see the environment in such a different way. And as you said, what we experienced was a sunset. I think 2 days after they got in touch with us, and then we went up this mountain and just looked at the sunset. And we wouldn't have got that view if it wasn't for speaking to two strangers. And you're the one who sparked the conversation first, as far as I remember.
But yeah, they were so wonderfully kind, I thought, and humble in every way.
That was a good point that you mentioned. Is like they were extremely concerned about our well-being. They wanted us to enjoy our time there as much as possible,
Yeah,
and kind of show them what they show us what they get up to. Um, I think it was in the weekend that we were there, but yeah, and that's for me. It threw me back, and I think that's what allowed me to just um, open up a bit because they created that space.
Yeah. Weirdly, I think we both have. So that was when we were in Lalibela, I believe,
Yes.
which was when I met up with you. And I think we both have they've asked us to read something from our journeys there. And I think we both ended up picking a piece from this place. So I wondered if you wanted to read the bit that you wrote about our time in Lalibela, or that was inspired by our time in Lalibela.
Well, as a musician, my natural instincts is to write a song. I wrote something for when I was in Lalibela, but like the one that I wanted to really share was my moment um, in Ghana, actually. Yeah. But I'll let you read out yours.
Oh yeah, sure. Yeah, well, fine. And you are not written into this piece, but you are there, and it's a weird moment that happened that I told you about after. And I think you had disappeared somewhere, and so you missed that very strange interaction that happened when we went with Prince up the hill. And so I've just written about that. And so I'll read it, and you can tell me if you remember it. And so it starts from here. This is just a little piece out of a much longer essay that I wrote about Ethiopia. In Lalibela, the mountains are monasteries and the rocks are churches. The holy places never built or constructed in the way we usually think of buildings or constructions. Rather, they are dug into the landscape or chiseled and carved out of the boulders. It is breathtaking to stand in these places and contemplate the work done. To have carved out from a single rock an entire church, this is Africa's Jerusalem, or at least that was the intention, to make a holy place on the continent so that the early Ethiopian Christians would not have to risk their lives pilgriming across hostile territories to get to the real Jerusalem. So many hundreds of years old, and these churches are still in use. On any given evening, sitting in Lalibela, it might sound as if the rocks and the mountains are chanting. I go up the mountain with Prince as my guide, Prince who grew up here in Lalibela, who studied biology at university and used to teach in a high school, but the money was too little. He makes more now as a tour guide. Climbing up the mountain is especially loud. It is the day of Emmanuel. We reach and I wander about. Even in the midst of the solemnity and the worship, an argument develops on the mountain. Prince is involved. It takes me a moment to realize I am implicated as well. We are standing in the doorway of one of the worship spaces. A man is sitting on the floor in front of the priest, his camera out and the full zoom of the lens pointing at the holy man. So this man sitting down and trying to take his picture has turned around, annoyed, and has snapped at us. Could you come further in? You're blocking the light. But Prince does not move. He would have to squeeze himself into a corner to accommodate the man trying to take the photograph. When I realize what is happening, I stand firmly with Prince. The man is trying again to take the picture, but whatever he sees in the viewfinder is obviously too dark. He throws his fists in the air and turns to us again. Could you get out of the damned doorway? He is almost frothing with rage. Prince does not move, and I am standing firmly with Prince. And then Prince can no longer hold his tongue. You are selfish man, sir, he says. You come here into holy place and command people, make people uncomfortable. You are selfish. Two English women are standing behind the sitting man, and in a flustering kind of way, they are suddenly tripping over their own mouth to speak. Oh, no, 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 he wasn't making us uncomfortable at all, they protest. I assume by people they could only understand Prince as referring to them, as if he too is not a person in this place, as if he could not possibly be speaking on his own behalf. Yes, I say to the woman, but it is rather impolite, don't you think, to come to someone's country and be so rude about things, to bark orders at them like that, don't you think? And they look at me, seemingly stunned, not sure what to make of me. Yes, I suppose, one says. I was just trying to diffuse an argument, and I do not say the obvious, that in trying to diffuse the tension, they instinctively come out in defense of the rude man who has now picked up his camera in a huff and stormed out. Prince's hands are now a flurry of activity, his finger constantly going from forehead to chest, then shoulder to shoulder, making the sign of the cross. I'm so sorry, Prince says to me. I did not want to start an argument in a holy place. He seems embarrassed that he has possibly offended me, but even more that he might have offended his God. I do not know about God, but I try to reassure him that I am not offended and that I agree with his stance. That man was Italian, you see, Prince says, as if that should explain something else. And it does. The complicated history between the two countries, and these ways that tourism often replicates colonialism. The outsider who feels the native should show deference, should happily squeeze themselves into corners when commanded, but who could never contemplate, yet alone tolerate, bodies such as ours, dark bodies, visiting any of their European cities and making such demands. We walk out of the temple. The Italian man is there at the door waiting on us. He is still obviously bothered. He needs to get something else off his chest. And as if he has not already revealed his full self, he looks to both of us and says, "You people should be grateful that people like me visit your country. You people should be thankful that we are pouring money into your economy. You people, I have been included because of my body. Because of my skin, I have become Ethiopian and worthy of his contempt. He cannot imagine someone like me being similar to himself. He cannot imagine me as the tourist. People like me, he had said next, by which he meant white, though I suspect he's not fully aware of all that he implied. I am seething. I am so very angry at this Italian man who thinks Ethiopians must all obey and grovel before him. I am angry at the English women who seem to only understand themselves as people. I am angry enough to say something, and I wonder, how do we do it? How do we make it through each day when there is so much in the world to be angry about?
I do recall that situation extremely well. I remember you telling me about that. It was interesting. Before we went to the Holy Church, we asked Prince about how often people who live around the neighborhood come to pray in the church, and he was like, "Well, it's open for the public, and we come here and pray all the time." And but recently, they've now cornered off some sections of the church and created more of a tourist attraction, which 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 is weird to hear. That's something that people enjoy most Sundays. now they can't really enjoy it in the same way without um, it being looked as a kind of spectacle thing. Um, I remember how you described that situation with the Italian man, because I think I left the the section that you guys were in to just kind of look or record calls for prayer. Um, and I remember you telling me about how angry you were.
Yeah, I was.
um, but it feels I don't know how controversial this is, but a friend said to me is that like the form of entitlement, the moment where you go and visit a new place, you feel like the place should shift and bend for you.
Yeah, that's absolutely right, and it's not as if any of us are immune from that. We all go with expectations of a place, and it's something that I was trying to be very conscious of, not to put those expectations on a place, especially when you have the advantage, you have the money, you are the one pouring it into this quote unquote economy, and you can feel that kind of entitlement. Um, and I think it was important, at least for me in that journey, to observe
Yeah,
these places on their own terms.
for sure. But then on the other hand, it's like no one like forced your hand and told you, "Oh, come and visit Lalibela." You made that active choice. So like there should be more emphasis on respecting um, the place that you go to rather than thinking that you're entitled.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, before we run out of time,
Oh, sugar. I mean, like, time ticking away already.
yeah, I mean, I told you a bit about what my journey was before you arrived, and you spent a little bit longer in Ghana after I left. You didn't end up
Yeah.
in Nigeria, did you?
No, no, I did end up in Nigeria. I was going to go to Nigeria before coming back, but I think there was two fears: COVID one and being able to finish the last part of recording in the studio.
All right. Well,
Um,
yeah. Well, tell
but
us about the last part of your journey then. When I left.
so when you left me in Ghana, um, I got in touch with a friend of a friend who told me that there was a studio not too far away from where we were staying. So I went to go visit the studio with like no intent to do anything whatsoever, and then met a couple of musicians and a producer called Reynold, and um, they were playing me some stuff and feeding off the energy, and recommended them to do a couple of things, and um, from nowhere we just ended up creating a song and making some music, and I wrote the song, and Raymond played on the guitar and the bass, and we kind of produced the whole song together. And then within the day, it was done. Um, as well as that, I also got introduced to someone who was a fighter, and I told them that like I do Muay Thai training back in Edinburgh as well, and they're like, "Oh, you should come to the gym." So I went to the gym and I trained there for a couple of days. So it pretty much felt like I created the same kind of environment for myself that I have in Edinburgh, but just with a different flavor, with extra spice. So yeah, that was the majority of the things that I got up to when you left. The owner of the guest house that we were staying in took me on another adventure, and
She was lovely.
she was absolutely amazing. She took me to another adventure to see like the different parts of Ghana. And although it's a very metropolitan city and everyone it kind of merges together, um, there was like the business side where the bigger buildings are, and like I don't know, a bit more money. And so she took me to that part of town, and it was interesting to see how westernized it was. The For me, what I see when I'm in Africa in terms of aesthetics and like that general vibe is brightness, colorfulness. So I was expecting to see these business, what do you call it, business part of town to have that same kind of color and vibrancy, but they kind of adopted the minimalist Swedish thing, so it kind of like threw me off because it didn't feel like the same part of Accra that we stayed in.
Yeah. Well, I love that how these places always resist or imposition or ideas of what the place should look like. I think we're almost out of time, so I think you should take over now, and you should read the bit that you wrote about Africa, and then lead us out of this podcast. So,
Okay.
Thank you. That's all you'll hear from me. I'm Kei Miller. Over to you, Kayus, to take us out.
So as well as recording and training and just venturing around Ghana, Kai and myself also went to Amina Castle and Cape Coast Castle. And when we were there, I had this very overwhelming feeling inside of me when we went into one of the dungeons. The tour kind of carried on without me at that point. My feet kind of like glued to the floor, and I stayed there for a long period of time, just kind of soaking the energy and tears dripping down my eyes, and I didn't know for what reason that happened. I took that feeling and then went back to the guest house and decided to write the song, I guess. I'm not gonna sing it. I'm gonna read it out in text, and like how it. I'm just gonna read it out without singing it. I think it feels better that way. Anyway, so here it is. When I felt the bones beneath my feet, cement floors quickly soaked up the tears. The rusted metal speaks of those who were here. Above was heaven, below was hell. Above was heaven, where the demons dwell. Came with violence in the name of Jehovah, taking over, taking over. Shameless shepherds herd us to the dark, taking over, taking over. Sacrifice as we dearly depart, taking over, taking over. All these stories left untold. All I can feel is what my spirit whispers. Sister, brother, words and prayers, glued to the blood on the floor. Couldn't move, wasn't able to speak when I felt the bones beneath my feet. Taking over me. Taking over in the name of Jehovah, taking over me. Taking over in the name of Jehovah, taking over, taking over me. Separate me from this to remember that we shouldn't do it again, to remember that it shouldn't happen again. So, yeah. So thank you for joining us in this podcast. For those who are not aware, um, this year the festival program is free of charge, and to hear more, it would be great for those for people to donate. So I guess I will be asking for donations. And before we go, I'm going to play a bit of the song that I recorded in Ghana as well, to close everything off. Once again, thank you for joining us. I'm Kayus Bankole.
And I'm Kei Miller. See you.
Bye-bye.